Our chicken composting system depends on some external inputs in the form of some compost bins that we have access to at a few different places around town. We normally try to pick up as we're driving by anyway. The last couple times we went, the amount of material was either nil or really lean. And so both Sasha and I, for the last few days, have been stressed out a little bit, thinking, oh, we need to make sure we get them more food, all this and that. But what I'm realizing is that within our system, we actually have a fair bit of a buffer or savings account. I think that's a cheesy analogy because it refers to banks, which aren't that exciting. But within the system, there are some caches, some storehouses of protein and mineral and nutrient. And I'm realizing this is an opportunity to actually explore those a little and dig into those spaces where nutrient has been cached for a rainy day like this. So I'm going to talk about that a little in this video. So the first and biggest storehouse of nutrient for our chickens, I think quite obviously, lives in this huge compost pile we talk about ad nauseum in other videos. But even if we're not adding fresh incoming material every day, every 2 or 3 days, built into this is many weeks probably, if needed, worth of backup food available for our chickens. And in some ways there's a benefit to not adding fresh nitrogen-rich material for a little while and turning this compost and having it exit the system almost like a little bit of a reset button or a spring purge. The last week or two, we've been getting heavy inputs of fresh food scraps, and I think I wasn't able to keep up enough with the amount of wood chips, and there were times where it kind of punched you with the amount of smell, ammonia, and heat that was coming off the system. So having it actually mellow down, I think is going to benefit the compost and benefit our chickens. It's still obviously quite hot. It's still loaded with seeds and sprouts that they can have access to. But one thing I'm finding is that whenever the compost has a chance to mellow a little bit and rest, that's when the earthworms actually come in. The earthworms can't possibly stand some of the temperatures we were hitting, 180 plus Fahrenheit. So the higher value food of the earthworm actually lives in a compost that's given a moment to rest and then access later on. So what I'm learning here is wherever we can stage piles of compost and debris and leaf litter and let it rest, the longer the better, like an aged wine. In fact, let me show you. We'll pause here and I'll show you another area. So here's some compost that's moved through the system over the last month or so. It's still very young. It could be used as a top dressing or as a mulch in our gardens, but we're still in winter, so we don't really need it. By taking this compost and setting it into a ring, so this is actually compost that's been here since January, and I happen to need some compost in order to do some potting up. Let's see if it's here. Now, this is certainly not a long-aged compost, but let me see if it'll embarrass me or what. The last scoop I got out of here, I had found a really nice pocket of earthworms. Well, she's eating them up before I even have a chance to show you. There we go.
Where?
So, wherever their faces are rapidly pulling things out of the soil.
I know, they see worms before I can even have any sense that they exist.
It's crazy, yeah. They're gone before we... Basically, I just see the tail ends of worms in here. So, here's one cache of food for them. It's not restaurant food scraps. It's not cooked rice. It's not old beans. It's actually earthworms, which is probably the highest value food we can get for them. And so what I'm learning is that as we're not adding in fresh material, dipping into this for our needs. So for example, everywhere within here are earthworms. As I bring it over to the wheelbarrow, what I'm learning is I throw a few handfuls or a few scoops into the wheelbarrow and then I let the chickens work it for a little bit. I go on to something else. And this compost that's just sat here for a month or two is a really nice source of backup food for our chickens. The last video we put out was the wheatgrass boombox, cheesy name, I know, but what I'm learning here now is that knowing that this compost has so many earthworms in it, I can go to fill these containers with a mixture of compost and some seed. So I'll just be layering, and I did just wheatgrass in the last one. This time I'm adding a little bit of oat and a little bit of corn. And we know now that the chickens can't have access to the seed or the biota of the soil until we flip it over for them. And so it's a way of accruing value and interest
Money.
in this compost and in these seeds and releasing it to them later. It's like a delayed food source for them. But even just a week later, that same pattern.
Well,
Still cold. So that became this within a week. And we can't even see it, but there's all sorts of latent little eggs of millipedes and pill bugs and fruit flies and all sorts of little beings that by storing this away from them for a little while, let them evolve into a higher level food source for them. So these hens are waiting somewhat impatiently because they know this game. Basically, this is the low end of the chicken yard, and we talk about this in other videos where the water in our landscape, the excess nutrient in the landscape, flows down through the chicken yard and ends up in this last swale where we've got hazelnuts and honeyberries, black currants, red currants, all sorts of plants to absorb the excess nutrient. But by filling this wet, mucky trench area with leaves and wood chips all fall, by agricultural standards, this is an insanely marginal space. It's every rain, there's standing water here. But by leaving this and filling it with bulk organic matter in the fall, you can see the old oak leaves and willow leaves. I just flipped this the other day, so it's a little lean. But this whole area is actually packed with worms for them. You can see they're picking them out left and right in there. If I go to a spot that I haven't turned in the last 2 days.
yeah, I gave them a lot from here the other day, so.
Yeah, we both tap into these savings accounts. So it's basically just muck soil. But basically, anytime you see their heads wiggle for a moment, they're grabbing an earthworm.
Pecking each other.
Pecking each other rudely. I'm sorry, Mrs. Man. She's one of the young ones. She gets beat up a little bit. So basically, wet soaking clay with some old rotting leaves in some ways has the highest amount of protein for our chickens in it. And the key is to bulk it up and then leave it alone for a while. There's a spot we haven't hit for a week. Once we get warmer and it dries out a bit, we can seed this out to their whole grain seed, put rings around it to keep them off of it and allow it to sprout. So, just some ways to be able to bank, I guess, or cache some excess nutrient food for our chickens for snowy days, maybe not rainy days, but snowy days. And we'll get more fresh compost soon, but we know we've got the food we need for them for a while, and it's a nice high quality too.
It's really right after a rain that it's like just so full. I don't know.